So if you're engaged, you found a venue, you picked a date, you may or may not have a planner already. What is the next step? So Brittany, where to start? How far in advance to send save the dates invitations? Let's get the ball rolling.
Well, thank you. I always enjoy working with you as well. In terms of save the dates, I really, when I meet with couples and we kind of start talking about what their timeline looks like, I like to find out from them, is everybody local that you're inviting to the wedding? Are there people out of state, out of country? Kind of what does their tribe look like in a sense of who they need to get there? And so I typically skew my timelines based on that information. So for save the dates, the further your guests are away from your wedding, I say let's try and get them, a year in advance, mostly so it's on their radar of, okay, I need to think about accommodations. I need to think about getting time off work, childcare, all those things. And that gives them, with the save the date, the heads up of, hey, the invitation's coming. Would love for you to be there, but we want to give you, proper notice so you can arrange what you need to make that happen. A lot of times though, a lot of the clients I work with, people might be out of state, but, for the most part are fairly local. And I'd say even then you can send save the dates probably 6 to 8 months in advance. The only other piece to take into consideration is if you're on a really popular wedding date. So for here in Oregon, definitely June, July, those tend to be, everybody's coming into town for weddings. Everybody's booking hotels and venues, etc. So, that might be more towards the 8-month mark if there is, a peak wedding date. Or if you're more off season, I think you can get away with 6 months just fine. And like I said, taking into account where everybody's located. And then obviously moving to invitations, it's kind of the same rule of thumb where, people coming from out of country, I would say try to give them maybe 4 or 5 months in advance, especially if you're doing hotel blocks or they need to pick, menu information, that kind of thing. Send them out a bit early so they can get that information back to you if they're going to be able to make it. And again, book their hotel rooms, make all of their arrangements that they need to. If everybody's local, lives in the area, and especially with some, certain circumstances that we're not going to say, you can probably get away with even just 6 weeks in advance. And I would say to talk to your catering company if you are doing a plated dinner or something where they have to choose their entree, just because usually, that RSVP return date is based on, that information and how soon the catering company needs it to make their preparations. So I typically do a month out, but I've worked with some companies where they're like, as long as we have it 2 weeks in advance, that's fine. So you can kind of play with that timeline as well, mostly just after you check in with those other vendors.
Right. And I mean, kind of swinging this to Laura a little bit. So Laura, knowing that Lewis and Clark College is such a hot spot, and we have a few, locations out here that are just the same. I mean, literally, I know you have probably people calling you all the time asking you, like, when can I have my wedding there, especially for the gardens. How far in advance do people typically have to book Lewis and Clark College to get in there?
I would say typically more than a year in advance, so probably about 16 months, about 16 months in advance, just because the way we handle it is we devote ourselves to one couple per weekend. So you have several days to set up and enjoy yourself for your wedding. And as a result, that means that our calendar will open up usually January the year prior to the summer.
Right. And Brittany, kind of getting back to a little bit of a timeline for Save the Dates, do you think, if somebody's booked something 16 months out, which is sometimes a norm, especially not just here in Portland, but you're talking about New York City and, big time cities and stuff like that, to get those hot spots, that's what they need to do. Is sending a Save the Date out that early, is that ridiculous? Or what have you seen your clients do?
I typically discourage that just because I know, at least for me, if I got something that far in advance, I would completely forget about it in about a month, especially, if your invitation's not even going to arrive until almost another year after that. Like it just wouldn't really get my call to action, so to speak, because I would just be like, oh, I got plenty of time. I don't have to worry about this right away. So I would, make whatever arrangements you got to make, especially, for venues like Lewis and Clark and whatnot. A lot of that stuff does have to be done in advance, or, your favorite photographer, your florist, all of that stuff, take care of, as far in advance as possible. And then we can kind of skew the timeline for invitations and stuff based on what you already have. But yeah, you never want to go too far in advance. Otherwise, it's just out of people's minds.
Yeah, and one thing I will say that I try to tell my couples is when they have booked that far in advance, use that time, as you said, to book those key vendors, but also start with your Excel list. You're going to be building an Excel list that has the name, addresses, city and state, zips, email addresses, everything else, and also start putting your wedding website together. Because when it comes to save the dates, it doesn't need to be a formal invitation. It really just has to have some of the basic details, and then you can direct them to your wedding website to get, the hotel and stuff like that, the stuff that people, if they are planners and love to get their, hotels, all ready to go. I mean, some hotels don't even have their pricing out that early in advance, and you can't even get a flight that early in advance. But at the same time, you can still, collecting all the addresses takes a while. So you can at least get all that stuff done without, having to be pulling your hair out when it's time to actually press the go button.
Right.
Brittany, what are some of the options for invitations these days?
So I think, and not just myself included, I think a lot of stationers are kind of laying out 3 different paths for couples when they come in. First option being fully custom, which is exactly what it sounds like, where we work one-on-one with you to really create something unique from scratch, with artwork, the materials, everything. And that obviously also has a bit longer timeline production wise. So that's something to keep in mind. If you are wanting to do something fully custom and unique, that's when you should reach out to a stationer pretty far in advance just to see, what their timeline and their availability looks like. Because unfortunately, you got to also remember that more often than not, we're working on several weddings at once, or we can have several fully custom suites going at once, since that is our job, it's our livelihood. So yeah, keep that in mind. If you're wanting something really individual and specific, go ahead and just put the feelers out there early. Second option would be to do semi-custom, which essentially for couples that are looking at websites like Minted or, basically template wedding invitations. So stationers are offering that with their designs. That way it's almost a little more one of a kind, because you're not getting that mass appeal like you would on other wedding websites. It's more specific to that artist. And typically you can change colors, there's some flexibility with changing fonts and layouts, etc. Most of the time it's just the artwork itself that remains the same. So you can find something with greenery and, change your names or change it to cursive and then add a colored envelope, and it still feels a bit more personal than just going through something that's verbatim, put in your names and that's it.
Right.
And last option, which I've been trying to work with a lot of couples this year, is doing digital invitations, or at least even a hybrid of digital and a small run of custom invitations. And the reason for that, for one thing, cost effectiveness, producing 25 invitations versus 200 will save you some money there, especially if you want to do something a little bit more luxury for family and friends. And then sending out a digital invite, for one thing, inevitably, as much as I hate to say it, invitations, all of that stuff, except for maybe your parents hanging on to them, they're going to end up in the garbage at some point or another. So doing a digital for more, friends and, work, coworkers, etc., they can always refer back to it. Lots of services like Greenvelope, paperless post, you can actually embed your website into those invitations now. So we design, a beautiful template, gets uploaded. They still get the cute little animated thing of, the envelope opening with their names on it. And then they can either click into your website, or there's options for them to RSVP, choose their entrees and that kind of thing online. So that's also less footwork for you to do in terms of collecting the RSVPs as they come back, because they can just click through it immediately and get it done. So that's also a lot, you know, if there's a short turnaround time, if someone's wanting to elope or, you know, they're planning this rather quickly, that's a really good way to go, just so they get everything back as, you know, expedited as possible.
Of course. And I mean, one thing to also note, talk about cost and how many. One, you're always going to want to order more, especially if you're doing some sort of calligraphy on the envelopes, because, you know, we're really good at what we do, but we're human and errors happen. And you could also get the wrong address, because I mean, people never move in the middle of all this. And two, you don't have to send the invitation to every single person in that household. So, you know, when you're talking about couples or even family members who, you know, have or 2 or 3 kids or whatnot, I mean, you may not want their kids there, but that's a whole different story. There's only one invitation that goes to them. Do you walk through with them as far as wording, especially if they don't want kids there, those that would have a guest versus those that, you know, are not allowed to bring guests, and how they should be setting it up? Or how far do you go with that guidance and assistance?
So I definitely talk through a lot of that with my couples, and I also do have a wording guide that kind of gives them a general idea of, you know, phrases they can use. But it typically, yes, depends on how much control they need over the guest count, usually is what it comes down to. Or yeah, you know, for those who don't want kids there, there's definitely delicate or at least friendly ways to put that, especially saying, you know, think of this as a date night out for yourselves, get a sitter, you know, take an Uber, make it a fun event, rather than just saying we prefer you leave your kids at home. And then also, especially for RSVP information, a lot of my couples this year, rather than having, you know, the guest write in how many chairs they'll be needing or how many guests are attending, we actually just fill in that information and say we have reserved 2 chairs in your honor, 1 chair in your honor. That way it kind of nails home, like, this is what you're getting when you get here. We have told you, so do not bring anyone or bring your whole family, depending. So there's definitely different ways. As you mentioned, even the way you address an invitation can kind of reiterate that fact. So saying the Johnson family versus, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, the family part implies that it extends to their children. And by just addressing them, makes it seem a little bit more like it's just a more formal night out for them. So like, there's definitely little ways to address that stuff. I think the other biggest wording area where couples get stuck is kind of the salutation of the invitation card itself, and that's typically attributed to who's hosting the wedding, which can always be kind of a sticky conversation topic. And there's, like I said, lots of ways to get around that as well. You kind of discuss, you know, who's contributing to the wedding. I always encourage them to, you know, talk to their parents, see how they feel about it, but at the end of the day, it's their decision. So it's just good to take it all into account and then go from there. But yeah, we can always, you know, make additions for step parents, blended families, you know, even if there's a friend that's contributed heavily, there's always ways to word that stuff so that they're included.
Awesome. Laura, from a venue standpoint, I mean, obviously there's certain information that they need to communicate to their guests, especially in the invitation, but also in the save the date if they're doing a wedding website. Is there any particular information that you provide to your couples when they sign on, or, you know, is it kind of like a case-by-case basis depending upon if they have a planner or not?
Good question. We always provide a guidelines document, which usually gives them a good idea of some helpful tips for planning purposes, and especially when it comes to sharing that information with their friends and family. But I always tell my couples to add some type of language that they are going to have their wedding at an outdoor venue, because oftentimes there's going to be grass or uneven floors. So you always want your guests to be comfortable when they're walking outside. So I always encourage them to try and share that so that their guests know what to do on the day of.
Super smart. And one thing I would like to add, and I know we discussed this a little bit at our first session, but the fact is even if you hire a planner or a coordinator and even a designer, which all three of those are seriously different things. A coordinator is different from a planner, which is different from a designer. And yes, there are people who technically do all three. I am one of them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you sign on a package with me and you get all three. But regardless of what I do, when you sign even a planner on or designer or coordinator on, we work as a team. So I am still always talking to your stationer, whether it be Brittany or Lisa with Crave. I'm still talking with Laura if the event at Lewis and Clark College or whoever is the event person at whatever venue you're at. We all work together as a team and coordinate and communicate. So please realize that we are all in this together and we want this to come together seamlessly for you. So although, your planner probably wants you to come to them for, any questions you have, a lot of times I have no problem saying, like I had one client reach out to me today and be like, had questions about their tent. I'm like, I'm actually going to send you right to the tent person and we're going to have that conversation. Whereas if somebody had that wording question for me and I knew that they had signed on Brittany to take care of that, knowing that Brittany is doing the design most likely and all the details that go into it, I'm totally fine with them talking to Brittany and just saying, hey, Brittany, just keep me in loop as far as like, what's the progress? Have we purchased everything? Is everything in order? Like, when are these invitations coming out so that we can get them in the mail? But we all work together to really make this a seamless effort for you. Great information so far. And one thing I do want to add as far as the invitations, which I think a lot of people sometimes forget at the end unless they have somebody putting the invitations out for them. And I know that USPS has a lot of, issues going on with it as it is. But number one, make sure you find out how many stamps you actually need for your invitation. Because just like getting a card at Walgreens or wherever you want to, I've actually been getting mine off of Amazon because everything's been delivered. But wherever you get your cards from, every single card, has a different postage. Well, every single invitation is going to have a different postage depending upon whether you use cardstock or how many pieces of materials are in there. So make sure you get that information correct, and also bring your invitations to the actual post office and ask them to hand stamp, because once they put it through those machines, all of that beautiful calligraphy that somebody has done for you, all those beautiful stamps that you handpicked for some people, it's all destroyed from those machines. Not totally destroyed, but it's definitely not looking the beautiness that you would want somebody to receive. But there's no point in spending that much money for something to go through a machine. So make sure you physically bring that stuff. Okay, so we've talked about save the dates. We've talked about invitations. If only that were the last piece of it. But the thing is the day of the event brings, and even like the weekend of the event, whether you're talking about programs or welcome letters, signage. You could be having a 3-day extravaganza, a week extravaganza if you're that lucky and have that big of a budget. There's so much. So let's not make this overwhelming for people. Let's go into the basics of the start of the weekend. So whether it be welcome letters, welcome bags, if you do that, a program of what's going on for the weekend. So Brittany, what do you recommend as far as if somebody's interested in those full packages, what kind of costs should they be budgeting in? Because I feel like some people forget about that stuff till the very end and they're like, how much more?
Right. And even looking at save the dates and invitations, the the fact we live in such a visual and media based industry. And I mean, you see things on Pinterest you love, you see things on Instagram, and even, you know, stuff that I do that you come back and you're like, oh, I really want that. And people, I mean, when you're not sitting there and you're not touching it, it doesn't really give you the same impact when I'm like, oh, well, you know, that piece of paper is $10. So I think really that's where I like to have kind of an ongoing conversation with my couples as we go, especially for the first invitation process of, you know, what's important to you? Do you want it to be, you know, conveying the information in a pretty way and call it good? Or do you want there to be a very tactile experience of, you know, they're holding a piece of wood engraved with your monogram and, you know, the timeline for the day? You really got to kind of think, you know, what's your priority and in your budget where you also want your guest experience to be. Because again, it's an event. Inevitably at the end of it, a lot of these things are going to end up recycled, are going to end up in the trash. So I think you got to find that balance of, okay, what's important? What do they need to know? And how do I convey that in a way that still is, you know, branded for my event? And definitely when you shift from the invitations to some of the day of goods, when you start getting into, you know, letterpress, metallic foil, embossing, a lot of those add-ons, because a lot of times too, that has to upgrade your cardstock. So it's kind of an exponential curve of the cost is going up. So those are all things to keep in mind. And I always tell my couples too, when we're going through the process, if something starts to feel like it's getting too high in the budget, there's always ways to walk it back. And I always send out, you know, estimates to the companies I work with for those extras before we pull the trigger. That way there's still the time to say, okay, this is what this cost is looking like. Option B would be we do this. It's still pretty, still informative, but you know, you can throw that other money towards something that's more on your priority list, whether it be flowers, food, drinks, etc. And again, same for day of goods or, you know, weekend bags. That's something they're going to take the stuff out of the bag. So if you want to do a monogram or something on it, I try to push couples to do like, let's do a rubber stamp or let's do stickers or something fun that maybe they can use for a while too after the wedding, especially the rubber stamps. That's something, you know, they can keep and put it on their Christmas cards or, you know, something fun. So I like to kind of find solutions for those things where it's not so much a one and done kind of thing.
I mean, one thing that I always like to remind my clients is, you know, you hired a certain photographer, you know, whether it's digital or film, which we're going to get into next week. But they're going to be capturing certain details. So, you know, your signs, yes, they're going to capture those. You know, programs, they're going to get like one photo of those. You know, however, like your table numbers, those are really going to be seen like in your wide shots.
Right.
So like depending upon what photos are truly important to you, especially, you know, some people do like to, you know, see if somebody can publish their wedding. I, you know, more than not, I have clients who are always like, oh, can I make it into a magazine? Which I know is not important to a good percentage. But at the same time, when you're spending so much money on your decor and everything else, and, you know, a place like Lewis and Clark College, I mean, you don't get married at Lewis and Clark College unless you want to get married there, because it is gorgeous, but it's also, you know, expensive, just like a lot of other venues out here. So when you are getting married there, you know, a lot of people are spending a ton of money on, you know, certain items, whether it be tents or whatnot. Like, you're gonna get the wide shots. You're gonna have an amazing photographer capture that stuff. Like, you want to make sure that the stuff that people are gonna see in those photos is stunning. Everything else, not that it's not going to be stunning, but it's, as you said, Brittany, it's a one use type of thing. And somebody like me or other women probably will look at it and say, oh my gosh. But I mean, like, I remember, you know, back in the day when I was getting married and I was asking my brother about a detail, and he's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, and some men really do love the details. My husband is one of them, but some men are just like, so we'll try to understand who are you trying to impress? What are you trying to capture? and really what is most important to you as far as where those dollars go.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I also would say, you know, for things like programs, especially if it's being, you know, a paper format that's passed out at the ceremony, order half, because more than of, you know, your total number, because more than likely your guest list, I mean, those are typically couples. There might be a few singles there on their own, but a lot of people are going to share that. Not everyone is going to pick one up. And you also don't want to worry about them like blowing away in the wind and whatnot. So with stuff like that, you know, order half for the number of guests that you have coming, or possibly even less if it's a lot of big families or if there are a lot of children, because they're not going to take one, hopefully, unless there's games on it for them, which can also be added. So, but yeah, anything like that, just keep in mind that, like you said, one use, and you know, your photographer might lay a program with your invitations to get a picture of it, but that's all you really need, you know, kind of an extra one for. Other than that, keep it pretty small. And then moving, you know, into signage, I mean, that's kind of a different monster in and of itself, mostly just because, like you said, we all kind of communicate, and I encourage couples to keep that communication open as well, because I have a lot of good relationships with venues and planners where I know if a certain couple comes to me with you as their planner and, you know, their venue is Lewis and Clark, I kind of already have a baseline of what they could probably need just based on that information on its own.
And one thing that I was moving into, like the venue itself. So obviously every venue, you know, you have hotels who have their catering inside. Lewis and Clark, you know, they don't necessarily have an in-house caterer. You know, I mean, you guys have Bon Appetit there, but normally people are choosing from a list of, you know, 5 to 10 people. So when it comes to signage and stationery and stuff like that, every venue offers a different amount. I mean, you could go into, let's just say like the Benson, and technically get, you know, a menu from them and your table numbers and, you know, some basic signage that's going to be around the hotel. But Lewis and Clark is a different thing, and so are a lot of other outdoor venues. So Laura, what are some of the things that you guys provide or recommend that they go out and get?
Yeah, I always encourage couples getting married to ask that question of their venue, because you want to be able to account for that in all the other pieces that you're going to have at your wedding. So just remember, that's another way to kind of control the quantity as well as the price point. But at Lewis and Clark, we provide you directional signs from the road, which is very important, especially if folks are having trouble with their GPS. It's a great way to make sure that they have a good idea of where to park. We also have Uber and Lyft signs, so that if someone doesn't have a car because they're from out of town, they still have a specific point where they can have those drivers pick them up. And we also have courtesy signs for the public, because one thing about Lewis and Clark is we have a lot of neighbors who love to go into the gardens because it's a beautiful space. Like, you can really, it feels like a private park. So oftentimes we need to make sure that our neighbors understand that when you are having your wedding, it's private and that they need to maybe find another place to go. So we make sure to have that available, so that that's another thing you're not concerned about.
Awesome. Brittany, what, from an outdoor venue standpoint, because obviously outdoor venues typically require a little bit more than the indoor venues are concerned, what would you say, sorry, I'm just also checking to see if we have any comments or questions over here. What would you say, you know, is a typical amount of signage that requires, just like from like even a directional standpoint, not even getting to like a welcome sign or program sign or whatnot?
I mean, as you said, I mean, it varies for sure venue to venue, and also just, I think, how much moving around your guests need to do. I'd say the most standard, even just in terms of traffic flow signs that I do is, you know, there's something that indicates where the ceremony is. usually paired with something that kind of gives a timeline of this is what you're going to be doing. Because I do always tell people, I mean, everyone for the most part has been to a wedding, but every wedding is different. And it's better to just tell people what to do and not leave it up to their imagination so they don't start wandering.
Yes.
So typically the next stage after that is typically like a cocktail hour, or, you know, appetizers or lawn games or something, especially for outdoor venues. So, you know, something that gets them to where you need them to be for that time while, you know, either you guys are off with your photographer for a little bit, or, you know, even if you're mingling with them, just getting them to where they need to be for, you know, the hour or transitional period before dinner, which that's the next one, especially like I said, on some sort of timeline indicating that you're going to go eat. And if that is in a different location, giving them an idea of, you know, we're eating in the garden, we're eating, you know, in the left field, something just so, again, they know that they're going to be expected to move shortly. And then even, you know, there are some venues where, you know, dinner is a very separate event than the actual reception. So like I said, just keeping the flow of traffic and giving them more information about what's expected of them is better than, like I said, leaving them to their own devices, because people are gonna, you know, see your beautiful decor and think, oh, I want to go look at that, or, you know, grandma's gonna go want to go look at the cake early before anybody gets to it. So just kind of having that little bit of control is definitely important.
And in all honesty, you know, whether you're talking weddings, events, conferences, I mean, even when I was at the hotel, you will literally have signage everywhere, and somebody will still ask you, what time is this happening? Where are the restrooms? Like, you know, can I leave my bag here? And it's, you know, am I coming back here? Like, what? And, you know, that's the thing. I mean, you put the basic information on the invitations. All they really look at is, okay, what time do we have to be at the first place at, you know, and what's the dress code? And then once they get there, like they really do, people need assistance as far as, you know, when do I need to sit down? You know, like how long is that cocktail hour going to be? And that cocktail hour will most likely be driven by whether they had a first look or not a first look, which again, not to get into that conversation here, but, you know, the timeline does ebb and flow a little bit, nothing dramatic to where, you know, whatever they put on a sign is going to drastically change. But people are interested in wanting to know that, especially those that, you know, had a cocktail or two before going to a wedding, or figured, oh, like there's no point in me having like a snack now because we're going to have all these cocktails or have all these, you know, hors d'oeuvres, or, you know, it's going to be a sit down dinner at this time. So all that is truly, truly important. So yeah, so kind of, so we've gone over a little bit of signage. What would you say, like, do you think have escort cards, you know, they're mostly in for the most part because you have to get people to a table. But as far as like menu cards, table numbers, place cards, have you found that those have continued to be popular, or?
It really depends on the type of event for sure. Like you said, it's nice, at least for people, like I said, give them more information, assign them a table, even if it's family style, just so they get to where they're going and you don't end up with the bottleneck of people not knowing what to do or being afraid to be the first person to sit down at a table.
Right.
And I would say for the most part, seating charts themselves are still very popular because it's a big focal point. So I think they've kind of merged into this decor element where it's kind of a fun pit stop after cocktail hour for people to find the seating display and have that be kind of something over the top that then gets them to where they're going. Place cards themselves, I would say it's about 50-50. It usually, like I said, depends on if you're doing a plated dinner where the entrees are being served. So the catering staff needs to know specifically who's sitting where so they get the correct entree. And there's ways to do that to make it easier on your catering staff, like doing either icons on the cards if you want them all the same color, or we can even do, you know, different shades of your wedding colors just to make it easy for them to identify who's getting chicken, who's getting fish, who's vegetarian, etc. Menus, again, it kind of depends. Plated dinner, for the most part, they probably picked on their RSVP what they were getting. But if you just did something very generic like beef or chicken, it might be nice to have something there when they sit down so they know specifically what they're getting. Family style is another, it's nice to at least have one menu at the table. Also, just so there's awareness for anybody that might have allergies or dietary restrictions. If that, information isn't already present on your website, it kind of just reiterates it so they can, check themselves and see what they might need to avoid. I personally always like to, when we do menus, to include the dessert on there or the cake options. I mean, I think a lot of people now are doing, fun ice cream or Pips donuts, or, bringing in kind of more fun desserts for the end of the evening. So I think
it tells you how much you should eat of the dinner so that you can save the room for the dessert.
exactly. Or if you're going to do, late night pizza or something like that, and, it's from Sizzle Pie or, one of your favorite pizza places, like, yeah, maybe you want to skip out on a little bit of dinner just so you have room for that later. So like I said, I think it's better to err on the side of giving people all the cards at once or all the information rather than, hoping they make the right decisions for themselves. It just makes the night flow better. They're all doing what they need to be. And again, reinforcing kind of that timeline sign as well. There's a lot of, either older parents, grandparents that they want to see the couple, cut the cake, but they really have no interest in staying for the dancing and the send off and whatnot. So them seeing like, okay, they're going to cut the cake and do toasts at 8 o'clock. After that, I can work on heading out, or be sure I say bye to them, and then, get a cab home. So they're not just sitting while everybody's dancing.
Right. Now, kind of bringing it back a little bit to venues, Laura, obviously, and I know I brought this up a little bit before, but every venue provides a little bit more than others depending upon what their setup is. So when it comes to like the place cards or menus or, table numbers, that is the type of stuff that you guys typically don't take care of, correct?
Correct. For us, it's mostly about, like how Brittany was saying, it's really important to make sure your guests know where to go. And especially when it comes to like restrooms, because a lot of people, this is their first time coming to the venue, while the couple and their family have been here several times because they're coming to tour for the planning process. And so having a couple of signs here and there letting people know this is where the ceremony is, this is where your reception is going to be, as well as other directional pieces, so that again they have a great time and they're enjoying the experience.
And from a budgetary standpoint, that is something that people should think about, because some people just say like, oh, I don't have to worry about that, the hotel or this venue is going to take care of a basic menu, or they're going to take care of the basic table numbers. Some do charge extra for it, granted, but not as much as if you were going to somebody like Brittany, or even getting it off of Minted or whatnot. I mean, everybody has a relative price to it, and it's something where if you are very, very budget conscious as far as your wedding and can only spend this amount, and there's really no going over that, these are the little things that could add up in the end to be like, oh wait, well maybe I can't do this, or what is a more cost effective. And as Brittany was saying, there are several cost effective options, and it could just be changing the paper, or it could be just instead of doing paper, doing a sign. But again, it's something to consider.
Absolutely. And I also, just to that point, especially with bigger sign sets, where you end up having welcome signs, seating chart, bar signs, 10 plus different signs with me. I typically, because I know a lot of people love the look of the painted acrylic and that kind of stuff, which I no longer offer as rentals. But what I usually tell my couples is, if you want to do that, let's do a welcome sign with, that's a little more generic, where it either just has maybe your names and the wedding date, but not necessarily the welcome to the wedding of. And that way it's something they can keep, take home, put it in their first home, frame it, or if they want to do, a quote that's special to them or something. That way, when they're paying that extra money for that sign, they're actually keeping it. and then let's, you know, use the rentals or other options for the signs that you don't want to take home at the end of the night and that are going to break the budget if you have to go that route. And also on that point, I do feel like there is a point where when you have a lot of signs, especially if you're at a venue where, I mean, Laura, at least at Lewis and Clark, they provide some of the directional signs, but for venues that don't, and I mean, I've had weddings where sometimes it's 20 plus signs, and I recommend, you know, let's switch up materials. Let's do a different, you know, kind of look and feel for some of these, or let's mix acrylic and wood. Because I feel like even though I'm an advocate for giving guests a lot of information to figure out for themselves, I do feel like if they start seeing the same look of a sign, like if it's, you know, 20 white signs with black text, they totally just start to get blind to it. Yeah. And they don't read it. They assume maybe it says the same thing as the one over there, which is usually not the case. So I think that's another important thing to keep in mind.
And one thing to also add to that, so the one thing that I do really appreciate about Brittany, besides how well you deliver on everything, is she actually provides easels. And some venues do provide you easels, some don't. But also realize when you spend this much money on whether it be like even a lovely tent, which we all know that those are a nice chunk of change, and then you spend this amount of money on all your signage, you need something nice to display it. Otherwise, there's really no point. And yes, your AV person might have that black or that wooden or even the metal type of stands. But as far as transportation, getting that stuff, like if you don't have a planner, you are most likely the one going to pick those up. You have 20 signs, that's 20 easels that you're sticking in your car. I have a Pilot. It's really hard to stick 20 easels in my car. So, I mean, I know we've done it before, and I'm like, oh my God, I hope I never have to stop short because I'm literally going to lose my head. But those are things to kind of take into consideration. Once you start getting that amount, as Brittany says, you kind of start overlooking it. And that's another thing you should be asking your venue is what, like, if you're not going through Brittany, if you're going through, like, whether it be FedEx or getting it through Minted or other places, what are they providing for you? What is your venue providing for you? You have it at a hotel. Some places don't charge at all. And some places, once you have more than 2 or 3, they're charging you $15 for an easel. And again, it's not the most lovely easels either. So those are all things from a design aspect to kind of keep in mind. Now, Laura, I don't think that Lewis and Clark provides easels because for the most part, your signs stick right into the grass, which is actually great because they're low and, they're great for driving because you want something that really sticks out but is not also like an eyesore at the same time.
Right.
But at the same time, you guys also do the black signs with the white, I forget the name of the material that is used for the lettering. But for the most part, those are only used for like directionals for the cars and everything else. For the most part, people normally get other signs to direct them around the actual university, or I should say college. And that's one thing, like whether or not you're doing an outdoor event versus doing an indoor event, to take in mind. A lot of indoor places, some people have the proper signage to lead you around, but others may not actually fit with your aesthetic either. Some also, like I know Left Bank Annex, I love that place. And even the Sentinel, they have certain displays for it. But what I was trying to get at with the Left Bank Annex is in other modern places, they have the TV screens where you can show off your programs that way. You can show off if you have a logo. You could also use those logos to kind of make your dance floor too, depending upon what kind of mechanisms they have installed. Obviously, there might be an extra cost to all that. But those are, especially when you're talking about stationery and signage and making it more of a, I hate to say logoed experience, but more of a just personalized experience. Those are all certain things to think of. And even places like Lewis and Clark College, depending upon the type of logo or graphic you use, they can sometimes even print those out as well on the signs, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So those are certain things that you should be asking your venue as far as like, how can I carry over that stuff, whether it be in the gobo, whether it be in the signs, whether it be a JPEG or something that Brittany sends to you or any other designer sends to you that you can send right to the venue and load that up. All certain things to think about. So there is obviously a start to when all this should happen. I always advise my clients about 6 weeks out when we start talking about the timeline. This is a great time to really start narrowing into all these details, because a lot of people aren't. I've had some clients with Brittany, which lovely, lovely people, and I still talk to them this day, but like 48 hours before the wedding, I'm like, okay, we got to get this stuff in because we actually have to have the printer print it. And then I physically have to go to the printer and get it. So, having that be part of your timeline, having those discussions with whether it be your venue, or all your different vendors that you have, it's, the communication is key. And this, like, doing stuff in advance is actually not a bad thing, just so you're ready to press the green button on that stuff. Because as you all know, we do more than one wedding. Actually, I only do one wedding a month, but that's just because of the business I run. Lewis and Clark only does one wedding per weekend, but at the same time, we still have all of those clients, contacting us about what they need for, their next thing. So the more time you give, the more options, and in all honesty, the cost effectiveness as well. If you don't have to rush print, if you don't have to expedite shipping, and especially in this day and age where even on Amazon Prime, something that should have come within 2 days takes 2 weeks still. All things to take into consideration. Well, we've had a fabulous talk. I think we've given people so much to think about. Is there anything that either of you would like to add to this?
I do have a question for Brittany, because there's one thing I've seen at a wedding recently where it was this stretch banner where it was a stretch cloth kind of used on the trees as well as the ground, and it was really beautiful, and it had a slide of the couple's initials and a couple of other information pieces, and I was just curious, is that something that you've done in the past?
I don't think that's something I have done previously. I've done a lot of fabric printing before, and anything's possible. I definitely have all the vendors to do stuff like that. It's more just waiting for the couples to come along to make my dreams come true. So we can add that one to a bucket list if anyone's listening and curious.
We all have these bucket lists of, what is your budget? Oh, it's whatever. And it's like, that never happens. And it's totally fine. I didn't have that budget either. And, after marriage, there's, life. So of course you want to save some money for that. But yes, we all have our bucket list items of the perfect client that has all the money to spend, and you're not trying to, cut costs every other place.
Oh, and that's totally where I will bend over backwards to do as much as I can to bring that price point down. If it's something I really want to do, or I want to be able to show it off as a service, I will, do whatever I can to make it happen. Not work for free. Let's not take that as what I'm saying, but.
Oh, come on, Brittany. Can you do anything for me?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. But yeah, those like exciting projects, I think we all kind of get a little antsy of what can I actually do to make this happen? Because, for everybody, it's exciting to see something unique at a wedding, or to just have something that we haven't seen a million times on Pinterest.
Well, yeah, and that's why I try to tell clients. I love when you come to me with Pinterest stuff or a PowerPoint, but let's be real, no designer wants to replicate somebody else's stuff. The fact is, we do what we love because we can create something unique, holistic, and personalized for each one of our clients, whether it's a wedding, a social event, or even a corporate event. So let's take a look at all that stuff and then find out what you truly love about it and use the certain elements from it and make it yours so that it's uniquely special. This way, when your photographer captures it, they're capturing something that is specific and amazing for you. And on that note, I am going to end this because I think we've given so much information to our viewers. And just like signs, I don't want them to get overwhelmed with information. But thank you both for taking the time to come on. Again, we have 2 more sessions coming up next week on photography, digital versus film, the following week on entertainment, as it relates to weddings, but really any event, kind of going over differences between DJs and MCs and live music. And again, if you didn't get a chance to listen to all of this, or if you did and you think this is amazing information, my fiance needs to hear this, or my mother, or whoever needs to hear this, we will have it for you on IGTV. It will also be placed on my blog, most likely tomorrow, so you can see the full thing via YouTube. But thank you, Laura. Thank you, Brittany. This was fabulous.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Of course.
Absolutely.